The courtroom was packed. People filled every seat, some standing along the walls. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered into microphones. A few people held their breath. The tension in the room was heavy. At the center of it all sat a small girl, just 5 years old, in a pale blue dress with a stuffed rabbit tucked into her lap. Beside her, sitting tall and still, was a large German shepherd with a scar down his side. His eyes scanned the room, calm but alert. The girl hadn't spoken a word in months, not since the day that changed everything. Now everyone waited to see if she would testify. The man on trial sat across the room, his face blank, arms folded. His lawyer looked relaxed, even confident. They thought the girl would stay silent. They thought the trial would collapse. But then, something happened. Without warning, the girl lifted her tiny hand and moved 2 fingers in a slow, practiced motion. It was so subtle, most people missed it. But the dog didn't. He saw it instantly. His body stiffened. His ears stood straight. A low, deep growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that seemed to shake the floor. The noise stopped the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. The prosecutor froze. The defense attorney turned pale. The dog's golden eyes locked on the man sitting across from them. He didn't bark. He didn't leap. He just stared and growled. The man on trial, who had been so calm just moments ago, blinked. His jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked unsure. The judge banged his gavel and called for a recess. The courtroom burst into whispers. Some people stood in shock. Others reached for their phones. But the little girl said nothing. She only reached for her dog's fur and held on tight. The judge's chambers were silent except for the slow ticking of a clock. He rubbed his forehead and looked at the lead FBI agent, a man who'd been working on the case for months. What was that? The judge asked softly. The agent replied, "She gave the dog a signal. It's how she communicates during therapy. It means danger. He's trained to react." The judge leaned back in his chair. But that growl, that wasn't just protection. That was something else. The agent nodded. "I think the dog remembers him from something before this case." Back in the hallway, the girl sat cross-legged on the floor. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand. The dog lay close, resting his head on the girl's knee. She ran her fingers through his fur slowly, like she'd done hundreds of times in therapy. She didn't speak, but her eyes were focused, calm, clear. She had given the signal. And Rex, her dog, had answered just a few feet away. The man on trial stood inside the defense's conference room. His lawyer spoke quietly, asking him what had just happened. The man shook his head. "She knows," he muttered. "Knows what?" The lawyer asked. The man didn't answer right away. His fingers tapped the edge of the table. "The dog," he said finally. "I didn't think they'd bring the dog." Outside the building, reporters rushed to cover the story. "Courtroom stunned today as therapy dog growled at the accused," one headline read. Could this be the turning point in the trial? Number one knew what would happen next, but one thing was clear: the case had changed. It wasn't just about evidence or lack of testimony anymore. Something real had happened in that courtroom. Something no one could fake. A child too scared to speak had still found a way to say what mattered. And a dog with a scar and a past had listened. Back at home that evening, the girl curled up beside Rex. Her mother tucked a blanket around them. The little girl still hadn't spoken, but she looked up at her mom and gave a small nod, just once, before resting her head on. The dog sighed. Her mother smiled through tears. "You were so brave today," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped gently on the floor. His job wasn't finished. He was still watching, still guarding. And the man who thought he had escaped justice? He had no idea that this child and her dog were about to bring his dark secrets into the light. This wasn't just the start of a trial. It was the beginning of something bigger. A silent girl, a scarred dog, and a courtroom that would never forget what it saw that day. Asterisk the courtroom. Incident left everyone shaken. Reporters gathered outside in the cold, murmuring to each other, trying to guess what had just happened. Inside the courthouse, the judge delayed the trial for the rest of the day. He needed answers. He'd never seen anything like that before, not. In all his years on the bench, a child who couldn't speak had just caused a complete shift in the trial, with nothing but a small hand signal, and a growl from a dog that seemed to know something no one else did. Back at home, the girl lay, curled up beside Rex, her therapy dog. Her mother sat nearby, still in her court clothes, hands trembling around a cup of tea that had gone cold. No one said much. The silence in the house felt heavy, but different now. Not hopeless, not lost. Just waiting, she remembered the moment clearly. How her daughter, after weeks of therapy, had learned to lift 2 fingers just slightly to signal. Discomfort or fear, it was part of her healing. And in that courtroom, surrounded by strangers, under bright lights, she had used it. She had told them without words that the man sitting across the room was dangerous. What no one had expected was how Rex would respond. The scarred German shepherd, once trained to take down armed suspects, had reacted in a way that couldn't be ignored. His growl wasn't a bark of surprise. It wasn't fear. It was focus. Recognition. The next morning, FBI agent Reed arrived at the family's home. He sat at the kitchen table with the girl's mother, the dog lying quietly at his feet. The girl was in the living room, softly tracing the same spot on Rex's fur over and over. Your daughter, Reed said gently. She gave a trained signal, didn't she? Her mother nodded. She learned it during therapy. She uses it when she feels unsafe. Has she ever used it that strongly before? No, the mother said. Never like that. Never with that look in her eyes. Reed paused. What? If I told you this wasn't the first time that dog has reacted to the man on trial? She looked up, confused. I think Rex remembers him, Reed continued. 3 years ago, he was part of a raid, a child abuse case. We tried to arrest a man distributing illegal material. Someone smart, someone careful. But there was a legal error in the warrant. The case collapsed. Her eyes widened. Are you saying it was the same man? Reed nodded slowly. We couldn't prove anything back then, but Rex was there. And dogs like him, they don't forget. In the living room, the girl pressed her cheek to Rex's neck. She didn't understand all the details, but she knew what she felt. That man, the one from the van, the one who had smiled with cold eyes, was the same man who had sat calmly in court. She didn't need to hear his voice. She had seen his face once, and that was enough. And Rex had seen him too. Back at the courthouse, the defense lawyer paced nervously in his office. The growl had changed everything. His client, who had been smug and sure before, now sat stiffly in his chair, hands clenched in his lap. She knows, the man muttered again. Stop saying that. The lawyer snapped. She's 5. She hasn't said a word. She doesn't have to, the man replied darkly. The dog knows too. The lawyer paused. The dog? The man looked at him, jaw tight. It's the same dog, from the raid. The one I cut. The room fell silent. Meanwhile, Agent Reed sat with the prosecutor and the judge, reviewing everything. The dog's history, the girl's therapy notes, even photos from the old raid. It all fit together too closely to be ignored. The judge leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. You're telling me this girl, who hasn't spoken a word since her attack, just gave a signal in court that triggered a recognition response from a police-trained canine? And that dog had a violent past. Encounter with this same man? That's what I'm saying, Reed confirmed. Then we need to dig deeper. Over the next few days, the investigation expanded. Officers returned to the black van, combed through every inch of it. They searched nearby forests, questioned former neighbors, pulled old files, reviewed past complaints that had once seemed small. The dog had started something that now couldn't be stopped. In therapy. The girl still didn't speak, but her drawings changed. Before, she had only drawn herself with Rex, safe and alone. Now she drew other children's faces without names, Hands reaching out from behind trees, shadows shaped like vans. She couldn't speak the names of the missing. But she remembered, and she knew the dog did too. The court date approached again. This time the defense wasn't smiling. And Rex, he was ready. The courtroom drama had paused, but the story hadn't. The small girl, still silent, still guarded, had done something extraordinary, and yet the world outside had no idea just how deep her trauma ran, or how far back the story really went before the courtroom, before the growl, before the van dot she used to talk so much. Her mother would laugh sometimes, asking how someone so small could have so many words. She would spin around the living room in dresses that looked like flower petals, and tell stories about princesses, dragons, and magical dogs. Her favorite stories always included brave animals. She loved bedtime most of all. Her father would do the voices, different for each character, and she'd giggle under the covers, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She was joyful, curious, unafraid, until that day. Her mother still remembered every detail. The smell of the pasta boiling on the stove, the call from her sister on the West Coast, the sound of the back gate creaking, just barely. 4 minutes. That's all it had taken. When she stepped outside and saw the van near the curb, her heart nearly stopped. A man crouched near her daughter, speaking gently, his smile wide, but something about his posture felt wrong. The way he leaned in, the way he reached out. She screamed her daughter's name with everything she had. The man's smile dropped. He grabbed the child's wrist. But just then, a neighbor's voice, sharp and bold, cut through the air. "Hey, get away from that child." It gave her daughter just enough time to pull free and run straight into her mother's arms. The van sped off, leaving tire marks and questions behind. The police were there in minutes. So were the agents. One of them, older, calm, with tired eyes and a kind voice, had led the investigation. He crouched down to speak to the little girl, but she didn't speak back. Not then. Not the next day. Not even a week later. She stopped eating much. She stopped playing altogether. She didn't go outside. She would wake up from her naps breathing fast, arms outstretched, looking for someone who was already there. The doctors called it trauma-induced mutism, the mind's way of protecting itself from something it couldn't understand. Therapy began. But progress was slow. Then, during one session, the therapist handed her a photo. It showed a dog, large, brown and black, with kind eyes and a long scar on his side. "This is Rex," the therapist said gently. "He used to be a police dog. He got hurt saving someone. He's very good at helping children feel safe." The little girl didn't react, but the therapist noticed how her fingers traced the edge of the photo. That was the first sign of interest. She'd shown in days. 2 days later, they visited the animal center. The air inside smelled of warm fur, medicine, and shampoo. In a quiet corner, Rex sat on a cushioned mat. He didn't move when they entered. He simply watched her. The girl stayed behind her mother's legs at first, but then she peeked out. Slowly. She took one step forward. Then another. Dr. Bennett, the woman who ran the center, knelt beside her. "He won't come to you unless you say it's okay," she whispered. The little girl hesitated, then extended her small hand just a few inches toward the dog. That was enough. Rex rose slowly and approached, his head low. When he got close, he didn't lick or bark or beg. He simply touched his nose to her hand and sat. She placed her fingers in his fur and didn't let go. From that moment, everything began to shift. Rex came home with them the following week. At first, he was quiet, patient. He followed her from room to room. He slept outside her bedroom door. He didn't react to sudden noises. He never barked. But when the nightmares came, and she woke trembling and unable to scream, Rex was always there. His steady breathing calmed her. His fur became her comfort. His presence was her shield. And then one afternoon she whispered 2 words, "Good boy." Her mother dropped the spoon she was holding. She turned, tears already in her eyes. "What did you say, honey?" But the girl had already buried her face in Rex's side. The therapist said it was a sign. Not that her voice was healed, But that trust had begun to grow, not with people. Not yet, but with this dog who had walked his own path through pain. She still didn't speak at school. She still didn't answer the agents when they gently asked questions. But with Rex, she began to draw. She began to smile. And eventually, she began to signal, 2 fingers raised. It meant she was scared. A hand over her heart meant she wanted Rex nearby. A gentle tap on his side meant she was okay again. The day she walked into that courtroom, holding Rex's leash, no one knew how much she had already survived. They just saw a silent girl and a quiet dog, but she was more than a witness, and he was more than a dog. Together, they had already escaped the dark once. And now, without words, they were about to shine a light on the truth. The weeks that followed the courtroom growl changed everything. The news had picked up the story, calling it the day the dog spoke. But the truth was far more complicated than what the headline showed. It wasn't just a growl. It wasn't just a reaction. It was something older, deeper, a scar that lived in memory. The FBI didn't waste time. The lead agent, who had seen the shift in the case with his own eyes, opened the old file again, the one from 3 years ago. A failed child exploitation. Raid, a software engineer, no charges filed, name sealed. Case closed on a technicality. But now, with a growl and a signal, the case had snapped back open like a wound that had never truly healed. That same night, Agent Reed sat across from Dr. Bennett at her therapy animal center. Rex was lying between them, head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed, but listening. Always listening. I need to know something, Reed said quietly. Dr. Bennett nodded. Anything. When Rex growled like that, was it fear? Or memory? Bennett leaned forward. With dogs like him, it's not just instinct. He was trained to remember, to associate scent with threat. He wouldn't react like that unless he knew. Unless he remembered something very specific. Reed nodded slowly. Then we might have more than just emotional reaction on our hands. We might have an eyewitness. One who doesn't speak English but still remembers the face of a predator. Meanwhile, the man on trial, the one who had once walked into court, like nothing could touch him, now refused to leave his cell. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak to anyone but his lawyer. And when asked if he was afraid of a dog, he scoffed, at least on the outside. But inside, he was unraveling because he knew he had seen that dog before. Not in the courtroom, not on TV. In a dark hallway 3 years ago. A raid he'd escaped with a smile while others had taken the fall. The only thing he remembered clearly from that night was the pain in his leg, and the dog that bit down with terrifying precision before being slashed. He thought the animal had been killed. He hadn't planned for him to be alive, much less trained. As a therapy companion, and he definitely hadn't planned on the child he almost took to be paired with that same dog. Now he was being watched again. Only this time the eyes were golden, silent, waiting. Across town, the little girl sat at her small desk, crayons spread across the tabletop. She was drawing again. Her pictures used to be of sunshine and castles. Now they had shadows. Tall ones, but always in the picture, beside her, stood a dog. His tail was high, his eyes sharp, and in every sketch, he stood between her and the dark. Her mother watched quietly from the doorway. She didn't say a word she didn't want to break. Whatever moment was happening, her daughter wasn't speaking yet, not to people. But her drawings were loud. Every line said something she couldn't yet explain in words. Later that night, during a therapy session, Dr. Bennett gently placed a printed photo on the table. It was from the old case Fuzzy, taken during the chaos of the raid. A figure running. A flash of a face. The girl didn't look up right away. But Rex did. His body stiffened. He stood slowly and moved toward the photo, sniffing once. Then he looked toward the door and growled. The sound was softer than the courtroom one, but more certain. Dr. Bennett placed her hand over her heart. He remembers. The girl reached for the photo. Her small fingers brushed the edge. She didn't speak. But she gave a signal, 2 fingers raised, a quiet truth. The same man. The agents didn't need more to act. They reopened everything. His van was searched again, this time more carefully. Samples of soil, traces of hair, microscopic fibers missed during the original investigation. It wasn't enough to convict yet, but it was growing. A thread unraveling faster with every day. But then came the moment that changed everything. A phone call. A hiker. A strange, quiet place in the woods where something didn't feel right. A cabin. Locked. Secluded. Cold dot inside, officers found. Evidence of someone living there. Cans of food. A cot. Children's toys. A small pink backpack with a stitched rabbit on the zipper. Outside, the soil matched what was found in the man's van. Still, it wasn't enough. The officers stood in silence, unsure of what to do next. That's when Agent Reed called for Rex stop. They brought him to the site 2 days later. The air was damp, the sky gray. As they approached, Rex stopped. His body straightened. His ears twitched. He walked forward step by slow step, toward the edge of the cabin, and then he growled. Not a bark, not confusion. He was telling them, this place is wrong. The next move would uncover everything, but first they had to go inside. The cabin stood in silence, surrounded by thick trees that swallowed every sound. It looked abandoned, just another forgotten shelter lost in the woods. But Rex, standing at the edge of the clearing, didn't move. His nose twitched. His chest rose slow, controlled. Then came the sound no one mistook this time a low, steady growl that rolled up from deep inside him. Agent Reed gave a quiet nod. He's telling us something's here. The officers moved in. Their boots crunched on wet leaves and dry twigs as they stepped carefully toward the door. It wasn't locked, but it creaked with age as it opened. The air inside was cold, musty, and still. Dust floated in beams of dull afternoon light pushing through cracked windows. At first glance, the place looked ordinary, worn, a simple table with rusted metal legs, a bed with no sheets, a few empty cans stacked in the corner, a shelf with old paperbacks missing covers. But to trained eyes, something felt off. Too much food for one person. Children's clothing folded in a basket near the wall. A small shoe that wouldn't fit a grown foot. Reed moved slowly, scanning every corner. Rex stayed close, ears swiveling, nose working the air. And then Reed noticed it. A part of the floor at the back of the cabin was just different. The boards were newer, slightly raised. A faint seam ran across them, easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. He tapped it once with his boot. Hello. Get the tools, he said. 2 officers rushed forward with crowbars. They worked quietly, prying up the boards one by one until a square opening appeared. Beneath it, a narrow wooden staircase led down into darkness. A flashlight beam revealed stone walls, damp steps, and the smell stale, old, and something else. Something wrong. They went down slowly, weapons drawn. The basement was small but horrifying. A long wall hung chains. In another corner, a mattress lay on the ground, stained and torn. A cracked plastic cup. A child's shirt neatly folded. Beside it, and in the farthest corner, barely visible, sat a girl. Her face was pale. Her lips dry. Her eyes wide and sunken but alert. She blinked once at the light. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. But when she saw the badge on Agent Reed's vest, her thin arms reached out, shaking, weak, but full of desperate hope. Help, she whispered, her voice more breath than sound. Please. Rex whined sharply. He tried to pull away from his leash, as if the suffering in that room reached him in ways humans couldn't understand. Reed dropped to his knees beside the girl and gently unlocked the chains around her ankles. You're safe now, he said, voice thick. We've got you. As he lifted her into his arms, her small body trembled like a branch in wind. She was barely 8 years old. They found more. Hidden under loose boards near the foundation were the remains of 3 other children, each with missing persons reports from nearby towns, each fitting the timeline The puzzle, long unsolved, had finally started to come together, but at a cost that froze every officer's heart. DNA linked the cabin to the man on trial. Soil from under his van matched dirt at the site. Most damning of all, when the girl rescued from the basement was shown a photo lineup. She pointed at him. The man who had smiled so politely in court, the man who had once walked free. The arrest came. Quickly this time. No soft words, no clever alibis. No cooperation. He was sweating. Jaw tight. Hands clenched. When they told him what was found, he didn't speak. Just stared straight ahead. But inside, they all knew he was unraveling. The second trial moved fast. With physical evidence, multiple victims, and a live survivor, the story captured national attention. News vans camped outside the courthouse. Victims' families gathered quietly in the hallways. The air was thick with heartbreak and justice. But there was one more thing left, the moment everyone waited for. The little girl who had started it all would return to court. This time not to speak, but to stand beside her as always would be Rex. He had once been cut by the man who now faced life behind bars. But this time, the dog wouldn't bleed. He would stand tall, silent, scarred, and stronger than ever. This time, when the man saw him walk into the room, it wouldn't be with fear from others. It would be his own. The courtroom was full again. Reporters lined the back wall, their fingers resting on pens, phones ready. The jury sat still, focused. Families of the missing sat together, hands linked. Some had tears in their eyes already. But no one made a sound when the door at the back opened. The girl walked in. She was small, barely reaching her mother's waist, dressed in the same soft blue dress she wore the first day her choice. But she held no toy in her hand this time. Instead, her hand gripped the leash of a scarred German shepherd who walked beside her like a silent soldier. Rex. His steps were steady, his gaze calm but sharp. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply looked around the room with quiet strength, his nose lifting slightly as if catching a memory in the air. The girl didn't look at the man sitting at the defense table. She didn't need to. She'd seen his face before. In the backyard. In her dreams. In her drawings. The man did look at her, though. His eyes followed every step she took. But for the first time, he didn't look smug. His hands were clenched on the table. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the dog. And that's when the color drained from his face, because Rex looked back, and for a moment it was as if time rewound. As if 3 years melted away, and the dark hallway came rushing back the night when he'd slashed at the canine and fled. He had escaped the courtroom back then. Not this time. The judge cleared his throat. Let's proceed. The girl didn't speak. She was not required to testify again. The rescue, the DNA, the girl found alive in the cabin, there was already enough evidence. But the prosecution had asked her to be present, just for this one moment. Just to stand, just to remind everyone that silence doesn't mean weakness, and standing beside her was the one who had never left her side. When the prosecutor asked the jury to look at her not to see a victim, but to see someone who held on through fear, pain, and memory, they did. Every one of them. The lawyer didn't ask her questions. She wasn't expected to answer. Instead, she was asked to raise her hand if she recognized the man who hurt her. She didn't raise her hand. She raised 2 fingers. The courtroom froze. The same signal. The one she had used in therapy. The one that had first caused the growl. 2 fingers danger. 2 fingers dash him. Rex didn't growl this time. He didn't need to. He just pressed gently against her side, as if saying, I'm here. I heard. You. The courtroom wasn't silent anymore because someone at the back gasped, and others wiped tears from their eyes. The defense tried to argue emotion over logic, but their case was falling apart. Too much evidence now. Soil from under the van, DNA on the chains. The testimony from the second rescued girl who pointed to a photo and whispered the words that sealed the case. He's the one. Still, there was one final twist no one saw coming. Agent Reed had gone back to the old case. The failed raid. With help from court records, a warrant error that once protected the man's identity was lifted. The suspect from that case? The same man. 3 years earlier, when Rex was an active canine, he had taken part in that raid. The man had fought back, slashed the dog with a knife. Rex had survived, but barely. That scar that now ran along his side? It was from that night. The records showed that evidence was suppressed, but the images remained. Photos from the raid, witness statements, and most importantly, Rex's service record. It documented the attack, the bite, the suspect's escape. The connection was now official. The courtroom saw it all. Rex's growl had never been just instinct. It was recognition, memory, proof. The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts: kidnapping, murder, attempted abduction, possession of illegal material, life in prison, no parole, no chance of another escape. As the judge read the sentence, the man barely moved, but he kept glancing sideways at the girl and at the dog, the same one who had once nearly stopped him, and now had finally helped bring him down. After the verdict, as cameras flashed and people filed out, the little girl didn't run. She didn't cry. She just bent down beside Rex, cupped his face in her small hands, and whispered the only words she had said all day. "Thank you." The dog didn't bark. He simply licked her chin, leaned into her arms, and stayed perfectly. Still. In the hallway afterward, the judge removed his glasses and looked at Agent Reed. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like that." Reed nodded. "That dog wasn't just a companion. He was a witness." The judge looked back, toward the courtroom doors, and she was the bravest person in the room. The courtroom was quiet again, but this time for a different reason. The trial was over. The man who had caused so much pain was gone, no longer a threat, no longer a shadow in a little girl's life. He had been taken away in silence, head down, hands cuffed, face pale, but she didn't watch him leave. She was sitting in the hallway with Rex beside her, both of them calm, both of them still. For the first time in a long time, her shoulders weren't tight, her small hands weren't clenched, and her eyes, they looked different, not wide with fear, not distant or frozen. Just steady. The people who walked by didn't speak. They nodded quietly or placed hands over their hearts. Some had tears in their eyes. They knew they had seen something that went beyond courtrooms and rules. They had witnessed something pure. A bond stronger than trauma. A girl who never spoke a word in court, yet said more than anyone else ever could. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Cameras clicked. Microphones were raised, but this time they weren't focused on the convicted man. They were focused on the heroes, a child, and her dog. Her mother held her hand tightly as they exited the building. Rex walked proudly beside them, his tail moving slowly from side to side, not out of excitement, but as if he knew his job had been done. He had protected her once in the living room, when nightmares made her cry silently in her sleep. He had shielded her in therapy when she froze at certain words. And in the courtroom, when everything was on the line, he had done what no human could. He remembered. And he spoke with his body, his eyes, and his growl. That evening, back at home, the little girl took off her dress and changed into her soft pajamas. Her mother tucked her into bed, brushing her hair back gently. Rex jumped onto the foot of the bed, turning once before curling up. His scar was still there, but now it didn't look painful, it looked brave. The little girl looked up at her. "Mother, can I read tonight?" she asked. Her mother froze. She hadn't heard her daughter ask that in almost a year. Her voice was quiet but clear, soft but strong. "Yes, baby," her mother whispered. "You can." She handed her a picture book, the same one they used to read together before everything changed. The girl opened it, sat up, and placed her hand on Rex's back. As she turned the pages, her voice stumbled a few times, but she kept going. Rex didn't move, just listened. Like always, when the story ended, she leaned in close and hugged him. "I love you, Rex," she whispered into his fur. He let out a deep sigh, almost like he was answering her. Days passed, then weeks. She started going back to school part-time. Her teachers were patient, the students kind. She didn't talk much at first, but she didn't hide anymore. And when she brought Rex in for a school visit one day, every child in the class wanted to sit near him. He didn't mind. But he always sat closest to her. Agent Reed visited from time to time. He didn't wear a suit anymore, just jeans and a worn jacket. He'd bring her a donut and they'd sit outside on the porch him. Her mother, and Rex talking quietly while the sun went down. Dr. Bennett still checked in every week. Though the therapy sessions had become lighter, easier, sometimes they just talked about animals or read books about brave dogs and their human friends. Other times, they said nothing at all. Just being together was enough. One spring morning, a letter arrived. It was from the family of the second rescued girl, the one found in the cabin. It was handwritten, full of gratitude. It said, "Because of your daughter and your dog, our child is alive today. We will never forget what you gave us." The girl's mother read it out loud. Then they both hugged. And Rex, sensing the emotion, placed his head gently on the girl's lap. He always knew when someone needed comfort. He didn't need training for that anymore. It was just who he was. Eventually, Rex retired from therapy work officially. He stayed at home where he belonged, playing in the yard, sleeping on the rug, taking slow walks through the neighborhood. The scar on his side faded with time, hidden beneath new fur. But the stories it held would always stay with them. The girl grew stronger. Her voice grew louder. She spoke to her friends. She laughed again. She danced in the backyard. But even as the world moved forward, the bond between her and Rex never changed. Sometimes on quiet nights, she'd sit with him in her room, lights low, drawing pictures of the two of them. And at the bottom of the paper, in wobbly handwriting, she'd write, "He didn't just save me. He heard me when no one else could." And in every picture, there they were, a little girl and the dog who never gave up on her.